Hello, commentary listeners. This is Amadeus Dredd with Rojira. We're doing starting our horror season commentaries today, and we're starting with, what can only be described as a classic, which is Ridley Scott's 1979 sci-fi horror film, Alien. Rod, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. Alien. I really liked this movie. It's funny because I didn't see this first. I actually saw Aliens first,
Yeah,
and then
so
I saw Alien 3,
I saw Aliens
and then I
first as
finally saw this.
well. I saw Aliens and Alien 3 first as well.
Oh, cool. Yeah, but no, when I watched it, it was still effective. I didn't feel that it was, any less than Aliens and that kind of thing. So no, I think it's a pretty awesome movie that still holds up today. It's got some great actors in it.
Yeah, Tom Skerritt, Yaphet Kotto, John Hurt, Harry Dean Stanton, Veronica Cartwright, and obviously Sigourney Weaver. I'm not really sure what Veronica Cartwright did after this. Have you seen her in anything?
I vaguely remember she had a cameo in some movie, but I can't remember what it was. All I know is the other movie I saw her in was The Birds, but she was younger in that one.
Oh, okay, so would you say she's a horror illuminist then?
I'd say so, yeah. I think she has done more than just this movie in the horror genre. This, of course, being a mixture of sci-fi and horror, but I think Ridley Scott even said himself that it was Texas Chainsaw Massacre in space.
That's it, yeah. I think that describes this film pretty well, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a bit of that 10 Little Indians sort of thing where you have all these characters and they get picked off one by one and the number reduces until you're finally left with just one person.
A question I'm often asked, and I'm sure you get asked this as well, is which do you prefer, Alien or Aliens? And well, in my opinion, they both do different things really well. Like this is sort of like a atmospheric horror, whereas Aliens is sort of like like sort of kick-ass action. And in my opinion, they both do extremely well. So I think really it's all down to what your preference is, to be honest. And they're both good films anyway. So
Yeah, I mean, I liken it to trying to choose between The Terminator and Terminator 2, because The Terminator is more of a horror film, and then Terminator 2, of course, is the action extravaganza and similar to Alien and Aliens. So, yeah, I'd have a hard time choosing between Alien or Aliens.
me too. And I think James Cameron wanted Aliens to sort of like be a final part, just for it to be a two-parter. But at the same time, he did leave it open for a continuation. And me personally, I like Alien 3, but if anyone doesn't like it, that's fair enough, because I get it's not as good as the first two, but in my opinion, still a really good sequel that sort of capped off Ripley's story quite well.
I'm just struck by the music. I love Jerry Goldsmith's score.
Oh, it's very good, isn't it? It's I think it's one of his best.
It's funny, some of this tech, especially when you compare to Prometheus. Obviously, Prometheus is a prequel that is set, I don't know how many years before Alien, but
About
it's just one of those difficulties.
About 30, 40 years, I believe it, but it's set before Alien. But my theory is the Prometheus is a research vessel, which it would explain why it's got more advanced tech, whereas this is just sort of like your old basic rusty commercial freighter that's just meant to tow cargo, basically. So that's why some of its tech probably looks a bit outdated. I could be wrong about that, but that's what my theory is.
Well, I guess you could argue that the technology that they're given on the Nostromo is pretty much just the cheap versions that they could find. They don't really care too much about spending a lot of money on outfitting it with the highest quality of technology. So it's just probably like, oh, well, we'll just give this to them
Yeah. Whereas in Prometheus, Peter Wayland, I think it's Peter Wayland, he invested most of his fortune on the Prometheus research trip, which explains why the ship would be as advanced as it is.
Yeah, he definitely would have made sure that it was to his liking and would have been state of the art in all areas.
So yeah, if you think about it, that would explain why this ship appears like less technologically advanced than the one you see in Prometheus. But feel free to draw your own conclusions. I mean, you could just at the same time say this was made in 1979, and it was made on the kind of a low budget for the time, so which which is why the ship appears as it does.
Well, it's interesting too because it brings to mind a lot of movies that are sci-fi that are set in the future where this is kind of like a 70s version of what the future would be like. And even in movies like Back to the Future, Part 2, where they sort of project, well, what will the world be like in 2015? And we look at our life now when we're living in 2015, and yet there's a lot of stuff that technology that we don't have, but is in the movie Back to the Future 2. So it's kind of like that sort of thing where it's like we're trying to project from where we are and try to be as close as possible to what could happen.
Yeah, that sounds like pretty plausible. And obviously now, in this day and age, they're talking about inventing things such as cryostasis, so interstellar travel can be possible. I mean, obviously with the talk of the Martian, manned manned Martian landings that they've got planned for the 2030s. And obviously Ridley Scott's Martian is sort of about that kind of thing. That's coming out this week, I believe.
Yeah, I definitely want to see The Martian. It's got some pretty good reviews so far, and also I always like to see movies at the cinema by big directors like Ridley Scott. Funny thing was, the first one I saw of his at the cinema was Prometheus.
Mine, I think it was I think it was his version of Robin Hood, which I did really enjoy, and since then I sort of made it a thing to watch all of his films in the cinema. It's just like a sort of a
Cool.
yearly like tradition of mine. And I would have liked to have seen this in the cinema.
Oh, this is definitely one of those movies I wish I could have seen. And there's just so many others. Even though you've seen the movie so many times before on a different format, it would still be awesome to see it for the first time on that big screen. It sort of has a differing effect on you than it does just on the small screen.
Oh yeah, definitely. And for me, it's interesting in one way to watch this now because I watched Prometheus the other day, which I feel does have its problems, but they're not really sort of problems which break that film, and this sort of does feel like a good companion piece to Prometheus, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think a lot of people expected the Prometheus film to be a prequel that was set maybe a few years before Alien. And they weren't kind of expecting to see the type of story that was being told. And I know that there's, I think originally there was a lot more in it that was related to Alien, and then it was sort of taken out a bit and that kind of thing. Could have even been the other way around, but from memory, I do know that there were a lot of differences, and I went into the movie with an open mind, and I sort of really enjoyed it. And I guess with movies, when you have issues, you sort of have to go, well, is this issue really something that ruins the film for me? It might for other people, but, when you enter into film, you've got to go in with your sort of, your own thoughts and sort of analyze what you're seeing.
Yeah, that's true. And me, I just wanted a better film than Alien 3 and 4 and the Alien vs Predator movies, and And I think that's what we got out of Prometheus, because I've always found it kind of sort of depressing in one way that we started here with Alien, and then we got Aliens, and then Alien 3, which, despite its production problems, I still think is really good, and then Alien 4 was just, well, less said about that, the better, really, and then we get the two AVP movies, and it just kind of like depresses me. Like it took us so long to get to the point of Prometheus, which, I mean, this came out in 1979, and Prometheus came out in 2012, and it took us that long to get from there to there, where Prometheus finally started taking things in a new direction.
Yeah, and I definitely think it succeeds in being better than Alien 3 and Resurrection and the two Alien vs. Predator movies.
Yeah,
I just don't see how you could say the opposite.
yeah, unless you're one of those cynical people who just says that because you don't like the film for whatever reason. But I suppose that's well, you know, I suppose that's your choice in the day. I suppose.
I think, too, it's good to actually have reasons, even if you don't like a movie, to have reasons that you can explain instead of just going blanketly, well, yeah, I hate this movie, without going any further into detail.
Yeah, because Alien, when it was first released, had a few strong negative reviews from people. Not like a huge amount of negative reviews. I mean, obviously this film was a huge success at the time, but quite a few people sort of asked questions like, "What was that thing in the chair? What was the point of like that giant ship if we didn't spend that much time there? And why don't we get to know the characters more?" And which are in one way kind of similar criticisms people made about Prometheus. So you know, it maybe it's the same kind of knock-on effect.
It's interesting in this movie how, if you haven't seen it before, spoilers, but Ash is a robot, a synthetic. And when you see this movie for the first time, you don't have any sort of inkling, at least I can't see any evidence that points to it beforehand, before it's revealed. And I think that's also something that's good about movies where if there is a twist, if you've seen it before, trying to figure out where the seams are and where it might give it away earlier. And I just can't see in this film any sort of examples before it's revealed that he might be a synthetic.
Um, I think if you look at it closely, you can see a few signs ranging from. I mean, obviously Ian Holm is a great actor, and sort of like he puts like a few sort of clues in it, like you know, a couple of like cold blank stares and sort of his body language and the way how he moves. Like, if you look carefully, you can sort of get the sense that there's not something quite right about this guy. And I believe they were going to cut out that plot thread altogether. I mean, I think Ridley Scott and I think the producers and writers kind of went back and forth like, oh, do we need that twist? Do we need to sort of have the twist of Ash being a robot? But I'm glad they kept it in because it sort of like added some more stakes to an already like sort of tense ridden film.
Exactly, and I think originally too that whole subplot wasn't in the original uh, draft of the screenplay that was written by Dan O'Bannon. Rest in peace. He actually he would have celebrated a birthday recently if he was still alive. But
Yeah,
I
that's
think
right.
that he didn't have that subplot in there originally, and so that's something that Walter Hill and David Giler, I'm pretty sure it was both of them that introduced that into the story.
That was it. Yeah. Because I can sort of see why some felt it would have made the film go on for a bit too long, but by that point, I think the audience were pretty much hooked anyway, so it didn't really matter.
No, I think that the length of the movie, if it draws you in and keeps you interested and keeps you aware of what's going on and you're not looking at your watch, I think even if a movie is 2.5, nearly 3 hours long, if it does that, if it draws you in, then time isn't really an issue.
I think the effects have held up quite remarkably well. I mean, with the motion control, I believe is the technique they used.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it would have been because, of course, this movie was made possible in terms of getting into production because of Star Wars. Came out in 1977, so
Yeah,
it's just funny how things work out.
which revolutionised special effects, and it was edited really well by Terry Rawlings, who also worked with Ridley Scott on Blade Runner, but he wasn't able to take credit for Blade Runner because he wasn't part of some kind of guild rules book, something like that, which prevented him from taking credit for his work on Blade Runner, unfortunately. But obviously, we know he was and still is a great editor because he's still working on movies today.
Yeah, it's good to see when that happens. You get to see people continue their career even in, I don't know how old he'd be now, but if he's still doing what he loves to do at his age, whatever it is, then I'm sure, it's inspiration to other people.
And one thing Ridley Scott likes to do, he likes to cast actors with a Shakespearean background, because then he feels as though half his work is already done. And John Hurt and Ian Holm are both actors with strong Shakespearean backgrounds. And I think Tom Skerritt might be as well. And I'm not sure about Veronica Cartwright. I don't think Sigourney Weaver's ever done Shakespeare either. And obviously Harry Dean Stanton, one of the greatest character actors of all time. He's always sort of like does his little sort of like quirky thing in films that makes him like always memorable. Harry Dean Stanton, he's almost 80 now. He's been acting since, well, forever, really.
He is such a great actor. I mean, the first movie I saw him in would have been this one, actually, because the next one would have been Escape from New York.
Oh yeah, I forgot he was in that.
Yeah, and he was also in Christine as well, the Stephen King adaptation that John Carpenter directed.
One interesting thing you might not know is that Ripley was meant to be a male character, but Ridley Scott insisted that she be a woman. He was absolutely adamant that the hero of the story had to be a woman.
Well, I think it was a great choice because in the original screenplay there was notes in it that said any of these characters can be male or female when you're casting. And I think it was just great that Ridley Scott decided, well, let's take advantage of that and let's, make the survivor a woman and not just make her a woman that is defenseless, but can actually, defend herself. Granted, she doesn't have the weapons that she gets in Aliens, but still, she doesn't cower in a corner.
Indeed, and I think it was when I listened to the commentary of this, Ronald Shusett, he said he wrote sort of like long character biographies of all the protagonists, but then he said he wasn't interested, that he found it boring, so he cut that all out. And I think he said, as long as we get good actors to play these parts, it doesn't really matter, just how much backstory we give them, because I think in any great film, you don't need to know everything about characters. I mean, as long as the actors are good and the script and direction is good, then what else do you need? I mean, and we can tell a lot about the characters just by looking at them as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is too, like with acting and bringing characters to life, I think it's great if an actor can have all that backstory in their head when they're acting, but there's not a lot that always gets through because, of course, you can't just have a big scene where there's 10 minutes of someone explaining their life story, because that would get boring for one, and also would be too much of a pace stopper. But if there's some of that in the performance, it might just be, well, my character would wear this clothing a certain way, he'd speak this certain way, or that kind of thing. I think it's good if that can come through, but yeah, definitely, you don't have to have a major amount of backstory for each character for really good actors to bring them to life well.
Yeah, and in all honesty, like the first half of this film is pretty sort of slow paced anyway. That sort of like introduces us to the characters, and we get to like see their little interactions and sort of like get to see their ticks and sort of like um, what makes them who they are and whatnot. And I think if there were scenes where they all just sat around like talking to each other and saying, "Oh, I'm from this, I did this, like my family's this," I think we would get bored and we would like not be as invested as we are because I mean you have to ask yourself. I mean, do we really need to know? Because I don't think we do.
No, and I think that's a very important balance to have is information that is necessary for the audience to know and just getting rid of anything that the audience doesn't need to know and finding that balance. Like, we don't really know much about the company in this movie. There's no explanations for the hierarchy of the company and that kind of thing. And so we don't really know a lot about the company, which plays well into the fact that they're wanting this alien for uh, the purpose of creating a weapon.
And I don't think they get even referred to as Wayland Yutani in this film. I think that's what James Cameron came up with for Aliens, and that's fine. I mean, obviously we know the company's Wayland Yutani in this film, and what I always maintain is the whole plot thread of a company wanting the alien for a weapon was kind of dragged out over Alien 1, 2, and 3. But in Alien 3, it did sort of like feel a bit tired by that point, but Alien 3 still has a good story, and like I said earlier, a good ending. But by Alien 4, I just threw my hands up and said, you know what? Like, this company has been like wanting like the Xenomorph for God knows how fucking long now. It's like, and they even like literally clone Ripley, bringing her back from the dead, and it's like, come on, this cannot be worth it, surely.
No, that's very high areas of ridiculousness.
It is, yeah, and someone wrote the script for Alien Resurrection. I'm not gonna say who, but Rod knows who I'm talking about, and he literally
I do.
wrote, and he literally wrote just like, oh yes, let's clone Ripley, let's bring her back, and let's have a company sort of storing aliens again and doing testing experiments on them again, and this will obviously go wrong, and haha, yes, I'm so good, I'm writing witty character dialogue for these characters, I'm so funny, yeah.
Yeah, it just doesn't fit really that type of approach. But yeah, Alien Resurrection, like if we were watching this movie with Alien Resurrection going on at the same time, I can tell you now I'd be turning the volume down on Alien Resurrection and not even looking. Actually, I'd turn it off. I don't think I'd watch Alien Resurrection at all if I was watching this at the same time.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I personally don't see how anyone could say Alien Resurrection is better. I mean, yeah, it's got more action, but the story and characters are just total crap, and it's got characters who aren't that likable. Whereas, what I like about this film is every time I watch it, there's still quite like a bit of good mystery to it, and like sort of my little sort of geeky fan theory is that if this sort of takes place in the Predator universe, like you could say that predators have probably been to this planet as well, and they may have they might have shot down the alien ship. And obviously, I don't think that will happen in the new Prometheus films, but sort of like I just sort of like to imagine, like in these films, like maybe at certain points, what if the alien and predator species crossed over at certain points, and obviously in Predator 2 we see the alien skull, so you never know.
Yeah, well, that's true. But that sounds like a solid theory to put, because if you do look at it as if, okay, well, predators exist in this universe, if you retroactively look back on this, you could say, yeah, well, the predator might have had something to do with the space jockey crashing here and that kind of thing. We just don't know. And that also reminds me, I think that if they do another Predator movie, they should have some sort of approach with the alien. I can't remember what they call the Predator alien. I know it's got an official name or unofficial that was in the comics or something like that. But I think that they should explore more the Predator side of things instead of the humans, so we don't have another movie of humans trying to figure out what's going on when the audience already knows ahead of time.
Yeah, I agree with that. They kind of did that. I think to some extent with Predators, but it didn't really work in my opinion.
Yeah, it just goes to show that ideas on their own, if you don't execute them well in one instance, then it doesn't become a thing of, okay, well, that can never work well. Someone might take the same idea and execute it much better.
Yeah, and I think it's like kind of amazing to think that this whole scene here is like mostly scale shooting. That ship is just basically a scale size model, but it looks like they are actually sort of walking into a giant spaceship. I mean, just goes to show how much of a good director Ridley Scott is. I mean, this was before CGI, so he was like one of those directors who I think. I mean, he wasn't one of the first, but he was like one of those directors who sort of like saw what could be done, with in-camera effects and scale models and because that scene where we see them walking towards the ship. I'm still not entirely sure how that kind of technique is done, to be honest.
I think it just is an example of how well this movie is put together on a lot of fronts, and you can't really necessarily see any seams that really stick out. I guess if you really just focused on that kind of thing when you were watching it, you might see a lot of stuff, but you're drawn into the story, you're drawn into the music, you're drawn into the visuals, you're drawn into the intrigue, especially if you haven't seen this movie before, you're thinking, should they be going in? Would you go in if you were with them, or would you stay on
Yeah,
the ship?
even
But it
even
makes it
the
futile
even
because
even
it comes on
even
the
the
ship anyway.
yeah even the design of their spaceships, sorry, of their spacesuits has always fascinated me as well. And here we come to like the big reveal of the big bastard in the chair. Obviously, we find out who he is in Prometheus, but even now, I just love the way how this is sort of, the camera pulls back and reveals. It's like it all like adds clues to the fact that this is all like that the crew are just completely out of their depth and just do not know what they're dealing with.
No, they have absolutely no idea.
This was going to be cut out as well. They weren't going to have this shot because I think it was the studio. They said, "Oh, it's too expensive. We can't have it." Whereas Ron Schuster was like, "No, we need to have this. This is like the Cecil B. DeMille shot. This is the shot that's going to make people think this is the greatest film they've ever seen. It's going to be something they've never seen before. We've got to have it."
Well, I mean, it certainly has made a lot of people question exactly what it is for so many, decades now before Prometheus came out. But yeah, I definitely say it's a set piece of the film, and it also adds to the world building aspect of the movie too, because it's like, okay, what is this thing? Where did it come from? Why is it here? And that it raises those kinds of questions. Plus the scale of it, how big it is compared to they are, and that kind of thing. I think it all plays well into the overall film. So to have it removed, I don't think it would have had the same impact. Not that it would be a bad film if this wasn't in it, but this just adds that extra impact.
Yeah, I like the way how the camera just focus for a minute on the space jockey slash engineer in the dark, then just say whoo, sort of like Prometheus. This is a precursor to Prometheus. But I think sort of like intriguing mystery is something that all the best sci-fi are able to do. Because you do wonder just what the hell was that thing, and what is this shit? Where was it going? And I don't believe I mean, this is just my theory. I mean, if anyone has read like alien books or whatever and knows what the actual deal is, I don't believe the eggs were originally there. I think the engineers may have been transporting something else, and I think an alien queen or something must have broken out and laid all these eggs. Because I don't believe this was originally a facehugger nest. I think it was something else.
Well, see, that's an interesting point you bring up, because obviously the Queen idea isn't brought in until Aliens. But if you look at it at this film retroactively, it would make sense that, perhaps the Queen did lay these eggs, but she left. Like maybe. See, we don't exactly know whether the alien queens have an objective. Like, do they just want to spread or lay their eggs wherever they can, and then just leave them to, maybe increase the population? Do they have a desire to overtake planets? We don't know those kinds of things. So I think that leaves the door open to Prometheus sequels as to, okay, well, do the aliens have an objective? Do they have any plans, or are they just going around mindlessly?
I can't remember who it was, but I think someone said they're a bit like parasites, perhaps locusts. I think they sort of just want to spread around everywhere as far as they can. I don't think they have. I think their only objective really is to just like ensure the survival of their species, really.
Yeah, and I just thought of something interesting too, with the idea of these laying these eggs and just want to ensure their survival. What do we as humans do? We want to ensure our survival. Obviously, no one's immortal, so we're all going to die one day, but we want to continue humanity and keep it going.
Yep, that's it. It's Ridley Scott making the facehugger in the egg move. He stuck his hands up in there and he sort of like did the little flutter.
Yeah, I really like that. Just the design work, like H.R. Giger, and rest in peace to him too. He's just the design work is just amazing. It's morbid. It's a mixture of mechanical and organic.
Yeah, like it was meant to be a weapon. From what I understand, these things were not created by the engineers. Those animals have been around anyway. I don't know what their origins are, and some say they were engineered to be weapons, but I think they just ended up sort of like becoming like bioengineered weapons, and because the Xenomorphs live on their own homeworld in another galaxy somewhere, as it's revealed in the Alien vs Predator games and comics. So, I don't believe the aliens were created. I think they may have been sort of tried to be adapted into doing the engineers' bidding, but obviously the engineers didn't realise sort of like the ramifications that would have. So maybe the entire Aliens series is sort of like a cautionary tale of if the engineers can't control these things, then what chance do we have?
Well, yeah, I just think it's an example of humanity's hubris. And we're all human, and I've definitely had moments where I've had a lot of hubris about myself and about things, and it just plays into that notion of we sometimes think that we're greater than what we actually are. And yeah, it's like, yeah, we can control this thing, and it sort of really backfires because we find out we can't control this.
Yeah, and the predators they discover that as well. They think, oh, we're the greatest hunters ever, and yet, unfortunately, I have to admit that if there's one thing the Alien versus Predator film did right, it was sort of like reveal the history that the predators couldn't control the aliens, and so they had to destroy an entire civilization to like stop it from spreading.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of like in that situation, the predators weren't doing what they were doing against them to hunt for sport, but they were just basically saying, we need to eradicate this species. Whereas you get the sense, obviously, with the other Predator movies that the Predator's going there for sport
Yeah,
and not necessarily to wipe us all out, because otherwise he'd just be killing everyone willy-nilly. He wouldn't be specifically targeting people who were threats and had shown themselves to be threats, because if you were in front of the predator and you just happened to pick up a gun, he wouldn't just immediately shoot you because A, he hasn't seen you use it yet. B, he doesn't know if you're a threat yet because, you could just be picking it up and not intending to use it. But if you've been seen to be using the gun and you're killing people and all that kind of stuff, like happens in the first Predator movie and the second Predator movie, the Predator's gonna want to kill you.
yeah. Obviously now we have the sort of like the parasite slash facehugger has attached itself to Kane's face, and again you're sort of like wondering, like I love this whole sequence of the film with the facehugger, like them trying to get it off, and we've like slowly reveals more and more about, sort of like the biology of this creature, and some would say, well, why don't they check Kane out afterwards, after the thing falls off? And it's like, well, they didn't know. They didn't know that it laid a chest burster inside him.
Well, see, this is the thing that I think is a good example of if you were watching this movie for the first time and you had no idea about what came later and all the explanations, you'd be in the same boat as these characters. You don't know what the facehugger is. Imagine audiences in 1979, they'd be looking at this and going, what the hell is this doing? What's going on? They wouldn't be thinking, oh, why didn't they do this, and this because in the other movies they do it, or that kind of thing. So I think sometimes you've got to look at a movie and put your mind in the mindset of someone who hasn't seen it before.
Yeah, and obviously now I've seen this film before and all the other sort of films in the series, and even now I still like watch this and think, uh, this thing is obviously like really iconic, but I still sort of like it's got sort of like like a bit of mysticism to it, like as though it's all sort of part of a bigger connecting story. I mean, obviously back in 1979, the filmmakers didn't realise what this would lead to, but I think it sort of fits into the wider canon quite well, personally.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's a different thing to what happened with the Friday the 13th movies because they were making it up as they went along. The first movie has Jason's mum as the killer, and then it says that Jason died drowning, but then the dream at the end, if it is a dream, says, no, he's still alive, but he's still a kid. And then the sequel is like, no, he's a full-grown man now, and he's going around killing people, and that kind of thing. They hadn't figured out yet the overall mythology of the character and the rules of what he could do. Whereas in this movie, even though they don't have the Queen and a lot of concepts that Aliens brought together, this still does fit into the overall universe of Aliens.
Obviously, the iconic acid blood as well. I'm still not really sure how that works. How it doesn't sort of eat through the skin or flesh of the aliens themselves.
Yeah, it's kind of like, do they have a certain kind of skin texture or something, or some kind of organic shielding that stops that from happening. I just thought of something too. You know how in this movie the alien is more like a humanoid in how it walks, whereas compared to aliens where it sort of crawls on different on its four, um, arms and legs.
Yeah.
The first one is sort of like a more upright, sort of lurking alien. And it makes me wonder if it's just because of the DNA mixing with a human that sort of makes it like that. But that sort of falls apart when you look at aliens, because in aliens, obviously the aliens have, been birthed due to being, humans being exposed to humans. So I think that falls apart when you look at it like that. So um, I don't really think if there is a good way to explain why the alien does what it does in this one compared to what it does in the Alien sequel.
I always kind of assumed that they just took on the characteristics of the host the facehugger bonds with.
Yeah, well, that's a good point too, and maybe it, also has some sort of traits as well that different humans might have, like a way of walking or a way of things like that, and that might be something interesting to explore too.
Oh yeah, definitely. And obviously in Alien 3, depending which version you watch, it takes on the characteristics of a dog or an animal in general, because I think in the original version it comes out of a dog, but in the assembly cut it comes out of a dead ox.
That's right, yeah. But I think that Alien 3 really, like this movie, it's not well, upbeat's the wrong word to use, but it's not a high adrenaline action thing that Aliens is. And then when you look at Alien 3 isn't what Aliens is either. Alien 3 tries to go back more towards what this film is. It's more about suspense, and it's about in a tight space, and it's about they're not armed to the teeth with weapons and that kind of thing. So I think that Alien 3 is a great bookend to what was started in Alien. Even though they kill off Newt and Hicks, that's a major fault I feel that Alien 3 has. But if I ignore that and look at the rest of the film of Alien 3, I can appreciate it more and sort of go, okay, well, yes, they kill off those two characters, but there's a lot more to the film than just that fact.
I agree completely. Um, One interesting thing I always found about this film as well is, have you ever noticed that Ash seems to sort of be sort of the most interested in the organism? He and especially in this scene where he talks to Ripley. He talks to Ripley, and they sort of have a disagreement over her actions earlier. And he's like, "Oh, but no, we had to bring it back onto the ship." And I think sort of little sort of things like that, just sort of clues that there's something else going on with this guy. I mean, is he taking orders from someone else or something like that?
Yeah, well, the kind of thing is, there's a bit of, hierarchy, who has actually got more power over one other crew member. And I guess you could look at it that Ash is under the command of the corporation because they send him on that vessel. They've planted him on there on purpose, and they're giving him orders. And so he overrides Ripley not because he feels that he's superior to her, but because that's his orders, you know, or it's a logical extension of what his orders would be.
Yeah, exactly. I believe he was asked to ensure the survival of the organism at all costs by the company.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is too, he's a synthetic, so he has a higher chance of surviving whatever this is compared to the others who are humans. So it would make sense that they're expendable, and that if they end up dying, well, so be it. At least he'll still be alive and survive. But as we know, if you've seen the movie, that doesn't come to be for him. He does actually become destroyed.
Yeah, and as I said, I think Ian Holm, he does sort of like add a few things that like makes you think there's something not quite right about him.
Yeah. And it puts a doubt in the audience's mind as to what his intentions are too.
Yeah, because he doesn't seem to care that much about the life of the crew members. And like interesting bit of trivia, John Hurt did the voice of Aragorn in the animated Lord of the Rings movies, and Ian Holm went on to play Bilbo in the live-action Lord of the Rings films and the Hobbit trilogy as well.
Yeah, I love connections like that. That's one of the things I enjoy about movies and that kind of thing is figuring out how one connects to another, whether it's through actors or through directors and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and Viggo Mortensen, who also played Aragorn in the live-action films, worked with Ridley Scott on G.I. Jane, which is, in my opinion, a bit of an underrated film.
You know, I've never actually seen that movie. I think I saw the scene where she goes through boot camp, but I don't think I've watched the entire movie before.
I think it's pretty good and feels more relevant today with the whole issue of women being allowed to serve in the military. Um, it, Strangely enough, it's a film which, when you watch it today, it feels more relevant. It just feels more relevant than it is. Obviously, we have that pretty good jump scare with the facehugger landing on Ripley's shoulder.
Yeah.
And it's like, could it still be alive? But obviously,
Well, it's interesting. There's a bit of a callback to this in Aliens when she's in the room and she's trapped in there, and it's like, where is this thing going to jump out from?
exactly, yeah. I've always sort of like found it interesting how the facehuggers, they must be self-aware to some extent. They just seem to be aware that their only purpose is to bond with a host and then die, and they don't seem to just think, right, that's our purpose and it's our purpose and it's what we must do.
Yeah, it's not like they're going to decide not to attach themselves to any sort of organic life form that they feel they could impregnate. And see, the whole thing about the facehugger, whatever it latches itself onto, and then when the alien is full grown, it takes on the characteristics of what its host was. It sort of reminds me of. I'm just trying to think what other movie in the series it's in. Actually, I'll have to rethink that thought. I can't remember where I was going with that point.
It's alright. And some complain, these kind of scenes here where Dallas talks to Ripley don't really add much, but if you ask me, it's sort of like good to like see that kind of thing because it shows that that the crew members don't quite see eye to eye, and you sort of get the sense that they've all like been working together for a long time, and they all just want to get home and go see their families and whatnot. you know, because they've been like stuck together on this ship for about, I don't know, what is it, 5 years or something. So they all just want to, let's all go home and like, you know, get away from that person who I've been stuck on a ship with for God knows how long.
Yeah. Well, I think it just plays into the fact that they do feel like they've had to live on this ship with each other for a long time. Oh, I remember what point I was making now. You know how the facehugger attaches itself to its host, and then when the alien is hatched and full grown, it takes
Yeah.
on the characteristics of the host. Well, that's similar to what the black goo in Prometheus does. So when people wonder, you know, how come the goo can do this in one instance and then do something different in that instance, but not do what they did before? It's like, well, the black goo is like the facehugger. Whatever it gets mixed with, you know, it evolves into something that takes on the characteristics of what it was mixed in with.
I think that adds quite a bit to the xenomorphs, and sort of like fits into, you know, their characteristics and how, as you said, like how they bond and like, because in Prometheus, the black goo mixes in with worms and it sort of like creates those proto facehugger worms.
Yeah.
Now it's going to be 10 months until these guys get back to Earth, and like their sort of reactions say, "Oh God, we're going to be we're going to be stuck together, you know, for just a while longer," and I think again that sort of like adds a lot to their characters, where it's like you know, they're sort of, they don't like necessarily hate each other, but I think in like a normal workplace, like an office or say a factory or something, I mean, you have to see the same people every day. You may not necessarily go on with that person, but you can still sort of put your time card in and go home and relax. Whereas these guys have, like I said, have been like stuck together for years and years, and which is why they're sort of like, yeah, we're going home.
Well, that's it. They're very excited, and you know, that analogy that you used is brilliant. And it's not like they can, as you said, go home and then come back the next day. They're stuck there. They're on this ship and they're doing their jobs, and you know, it's just one of those things that if you're not used to that kind of thing and you can't get used to it after a while, then obviously this type of work wouldn't be for you. I like Yaphet Kotto in this film.
Yeah, he's always quite good. And what's interesting about spoiler warning for those who haven't seen this before, one of the most famous deaths in cinema history is coming up, and if you don't know what's coming, then quite frankly, you need to. I suggest you turn the commentary off now. But anyway, for those still listening, how they did this scene was the only actor who knew what was going to happen was John Hurt, and they spent like I think hours and hours like setting this scene up because it was sort of like, you know, really elaborate and like really complicated to film, you know, with the practical effects at the time. You know, obviously this being before CGI, and the other actors weren't told what was going to happen. They would spend ages in their dressing rooms like waiting to be called. And obviously, I think they kind of like knew the basics of what they had to do, but they didn't like know like how John Hurt's character was going to die. So their reactions that you see to what is happening is not acting. This is like, for a moment, these guys completely break from character, and their reactions just like, you know, what the? what the fuck? Like, we weren't told this was gonna be happening. And poor Veronica Cartwright, she wasn't supposed to be sprayed with blood, but she was.
Yeah,
Like,
very a big
yeah,
surprise.
yeah, it was. like, like poor Veronica Cartwright. I mean, like, just the fact that she wasn't supposed to like spray with all that blood, but she stood in the wrong place and got sprayed with like, I think it was a pint of sort of like fake blood. And so when she's shuddering, just like it's like they don't pay me enough for this.
Yeah,
So in one way, you could say Ridley Scott, he was punking the cast, but he was like, well, you all acted well in that scene, didn't you?
yeah, and that all adds to the whole effect. It doesn't look faked. And it's
Yeah.
interesting with this sequence too, before, the big surprise, how it's a bit of levity in the film. And think too, like people who hadn't seen this movie before, they don't know what's coming. They don't know exactly what's coming either, so they would have been equally surprised. In fact, I think some people, when they saw this at the cinema, actually some had to run out or, had severe reactions to this.
Oh yeah, and they were told that was happening, and Ridley was like, brilliant, brilliant. That's going to make people want to go see it more.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like The Exorcist. Like, that had people apparently, I don't know if this was true, but apparently some would even throw up in the aisles.
What I find interesting about this now is you're sort of thinking, okay, where has this thing gone? Who's going to die next?
Yeah, because it becomes a question of where the hell is this thing once it escapes, and just adds
And
to
as
another
well,
unknown element.
and if you are sort of like seeing this for the first time or first time in a long time, you might think the alien slash xenomorph might stay as that little sort of screechy chestburster form, but it evolves into something else entirely, something even more sort of, you know, I mean, it's in the ship right now, evolving into its final form, and I just think that's kind of like scary, but in a really cool way as well.
Well, yeah, it adds to the unpredictable nature. If you haven't seen this movie before, you've got all these concerns now, and you get brought back into the situation because, as I said, you had a moment of levity, but that's over now, and I don't think there really is any later. Maybe with the exception of Jonesy the cat, but I think that's the only real moment of levity in the entire film. And it sort of, in a way, it reminds me of that scene in Aliens when they're around the dinner table, for lack of a better word, and they're joking around, and they do the bit where Bishop does the knife trick and that kind of thing. I think I don't believe that every horror movie needs to have. I think even some horror movies can have zero moments of levity in them. Not all, but I think if a horror movie doesn't have any, that's just something that can be more powerful because the audience feels as if they're not getting any chance to take a break, and if they do, they have to pause the movie if it gets to that point.
The way how I see it is, what sort of humour do you think works? I mean, I like humour that feels like natural and rehearsed, and if it feels natural, then at the same time it doesn't feel rehearsed. Whereas I don't like humour that just kind of comes out of left field. It's like, oh, we're trying to be funny, we're trying to make you laugh, we're trying to make you like this, and for me, that kind of humour doesn't really work.
Yeah, well, I think the best way to look at it is in this movie when they're around having their meal and that kind of thing. Um, it feels like a light-hearted sort of moment, and any humour that's in that scene comes naturally. Now, in Alien Resurrection, the comedy is different. It seems like it doesn't come naturally. So, like the bit with Brad Dourif when he does the facial expressions to mimic the alien and things like that. I mean, yeah, sure, maybe that character is a bit stupid in the head and would want to actually do that. But it sort of isn't the type of humour I think fits the Alien franchise. And it's sort of like in Alien Resurrection 2 when that guy played by Dan Hedaya feels the back of his head where he's just had the alien basically stick its second mouth in the back of his head. He looks at the bit of brain that he has and slumps over. And I think that sort of humorous thing is not necessary, because if that happened to him, he'd be dead instantly. He'd just slump forward, because the way that the second mouth comes out, it does have a bit of force behind it, so it would
Yeah.
kind of knock him forward.
I did quite like the like the fake out with the cats. You know, the cat scare. I mean, like I like how the cat is made to be one of the stars of the film. I mean, cats are awesome.
Yeah, see, I'm more of a dog person, but I've never been one to hate cats or anything. I've always been quite okay with them and that kind of thing. Like, I'm not allergic, or I don't view them as annoyances or anything. But I just haven't really bonded with cats as much as I have with dogs over the years.
That's fair enough. And obviously now we have a reason for Brett to go off on his own, and because he has to find the cat, because otherwise it will show up on their makeshift tracker. You might be thinking, something's going to happen to him. But I think they want you to know that something bad is going to happen. You know what I mean? They want you to sort of like be aware. What's got Jonesy scared? What is Jonesy trying to hide from? Because the cat is really skittish, and obviously we see like the shedded skin there. It's like Jonesy, the cat's completely freaked out and trying to hide from something. Because cats do have like a sixth sense about these things, and Brett's like what the hell's this, and the cat's gone in here. I've got to go get him. And what do you think of the fact that there's a condensation dripping from the ceiling? I mean, I think they said on the commentary it wouldn't make much sense.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't, like, to me that doesn't really ruin anything. I just think it's just all part of the atmosphere that they're creating. It's something to add a bit more detail to things, to the ship and that. I mean, it is an old ship. It's not some ship that they just got brand new that week or that month or something. It's pretty old. So who knows? I mean, this is why I don't think everything needs to be explained in movies, because sometimes things just are because they are, and to find out why, you'd have to dig into, well, okay, how old is the ship? Are there any leaks anywhere? And that kind of thing. And I think to do that, to look for that is just a waste of time. It's just like, okay, yep, there's condensation. All right, yep, okay.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I think the scene where Brett takes his hat off and lets the water drip onto his face, I think that was improvised by Harry Dean Stanton. I think Ridley Scott, being the great actor's director that he is, he just sort of like just stepped back and just let Harry Dean Stanton play the scene, as he wanted to play the scene. He's always been that kind of director. Like how do you think you should be in this scene? How do you think you should play it? You're the actor. You're the star. I'm just filming you. You're the one doing the the acting. So you show me how you think it should be done.
Well, that's why I think while it's important to have a vision and a direction for what you want to go with, it's also important to look at what your actors are doing and take their input into consideration as well. And yeah, I mean, letting an actor improvise, what they improvise in one take might not end up being, suitable in the long run, but at least you're giving the actor the opportunity to explore it, and you never know, that might be what you needed.
Exactly,
You've,
yeah.
you've got a few choices to make and to choose from. It's comes in handy later when editing.
Yeah, that's the kind of director Scott is. He does like sort of stepping back and putting his camera on the actors and just, letting the scene play. And they always say they always feel, all the actors, they always feel very, very comfortable on his set, and they feel like they can sort of breathe in their characters and perform.
Yeah, I guess too would mean they wouldn't have to feel like they're walking on eggshells the whole time either, wondering,
Yeah,
am I doing something wrong? And I think a good director too, if nothing is happening in the take that's ruining it, whether it's a background thing or something like that, I think that if the director doesn't mention if there's a problem, then that means that it's a good thing because what the actor is doing is fine and there's nothing that's interfering with it. Um, so I think for some actors might be thinking, well, am I doing this right? He hasn't said if I'm doing anything wrong. But I think in some ways you could look at it as, well, when you've done something wrong, you'll be told about it. Uh, so just assume that whatever you're doing is right, um, unless the director says, well, hang on, could you try it this way, perhaps?
yeah. No, that's right. And Ash's line there, when he says Kane's son, that was like kind of like gives me chills. Because in one way it is Kane's like bastard child,
Yeah,
and sort of like tapped into like like most basic primal fears, like what if this happened? What if men could get raped and sort of give birth to unwanted spawn? I mean, obviously that's unlikely to ever happen. I mean, I don't think it could happen. Um, but this. I mean, obviously, this is a sci-fi. You have to remember, this is sort of like a. It's not real. I mean, it is fiction, but at the same time, it does sort of like like tap into like what if that did happen to you, and what if you were sort of like stuck in this enclosed space with this thing? What would you do? How frightened would you be? And it doesn't matter like how strong you are. I mean, it can and will kill you.
yeah. I mean, it's got the upper hand in that respect. It can take you out quite easily.
I mean, because in Aliens, a group of sort of like crack, well-trained, experienced Marines, they couldn't, uh, they got killed off pretty easily. They were armed to the teeth with pulse rifles and smart guns and grenade launchers and whatnot, and look what happened to them.
Well, yeah, just because you're armed to the teeth doesn't mean that you can't be overpowered, and that's what's interesting about Hudson's character, played brilliantly by Bill Paxton, of course, is he's all gung ho at the start. I'm going to protect you, and my team of ultimate badasses are going to protect you as well, Ripley, and all this kind of stuff. But when the shit hits the fan and he has to face it all, he becomes a bit of a coward. You know, at the end, he becomes he doesn't remain a coward, but there is a point where he becomes one.
That's true. And like I said earlier, I think if you prefer Alien or Aliens, it's all down to which approach do you prefer? Do you prefer Ridley Scott's sort of like atmospheric, enclosed, you're all gonna die sort of like approach to Alien, or do you prefer James Cameron's sort of like bombastic, like action explosions, kind of approach to? Because Yeah, they're both so different. I honestly, I honestly can't decide which one I prefer, to be honest.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. I can't help but think back to the analogy I made earlier about Alien and Aliens versus Terminator and Terminator 2. And, I never really noticed this before about those four films. Um, but, Alien being more of a horror, I'm a horror fan, of course, that really loves the genre and that, so I really appreciate the horror aspects. But having said that, it doesn't mean that to me Aliens isn't effective because, it's not as much of a horror movie as this is, but it's still got those horrific elements in it. It's just that the characters in it just so happen to be Marines this time around. And so, of course, there's going to be action in it because you wouldn't have a movie where every single Marine just gets wiped out in one scene, like they almost do in one scene, but there's still some left. So there's still some firepower. Um, but yeah, I just think that I think the same thing. It depends on which you're more interested in. And sometimes for me, it's a mood thing. Like I might not be in the mood to watch The Terminator, even though I've seen it a lot of times. I might want to just watch Terminator 2. And since I've seen Terminator so many times, it doesn't matter if I just decide to watch Terminator 2. You know what I mean? So
I quite I quite like that scene in the air ducts because you just do not know where the alien's going to come. It can literally come out of nowhere.
yeah. And again, it's keeping the audiences on their toes.
I reviewed this film in a written review a while ago, and I said this film, to me, anyway, it feels like someone is grabbing you by the throat and dragging you down a claustrophobic tunnel for about an hour and a half. That's what this film feels like to me, and I think that feeling definitely kicks in once the chest burster comes out, because from then the film just does not stop in building up tension. And uh, and especially Veronica Cartwright, I think in one way she kind of represents the audience because she's just distraught and just completely terrified and just beyond any rationale by this point.
And I think too, Ripley, even before Dallas dies and all that, she has a lot of traits of leadership about her too. And I think in contrast to Veronica's character, she doesn't seem to be as much of a leader in a way. She seems to be just someone who follows what others do. And to add to that, I think she is sort of like the audience's way into the film because the audience, in a way, they're not as sort of uh, equipped to deal with this situation as Ripley might be, So Veronica Cartwright's character is like the scared person who's watching this movie, thinking, am
Yeah.
I going to survive? Like, I hope these people you know, can help me survive. I don't know if I could do it on my own. So she sort of comes across to me as a bit inexperienced with things. So can put her on that level with things.
You think Ripley is unexperienced? I mean, obviously, I believe they would all be unexperienced because they've never met this thing before.
Oh no, I mean in terms of their jobs.
Yeah.
Because Veronica's character seems like she's not as equipped or experienced, whereas Ripley early on has those leadership qualities, and she seems to be more experienced in the work that they're doing compared to Veronica's character.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think Ripley knows that if someone doesn't take charge, they're all gonna, no bones about it. They're all gonna die. So someone has to, sort of like come along and just say, right, this is what we're gonna do.
Yeah, and it also goes back to her not wanting to bring Kane back on board. If they had listened to her, then this whole thing might have been avoided.
Yeah. Um, I'm not really sure what the self-established um, gender politics were back in the 1970s. I think things were a tad more sexist back then than they are now, but I'm not really sure how audiences then would have reacted to a sci-fi film where a woman takes charge. I mean, obviously we see nothing wrong with that because we're kind of like we live in this modern age where women like have like more active roles. I mean, we like films where there's women who are strong characters, but back then I would imagine. I mean, obviously, so I wasn't around in the 1970s, so I don't really know, but I would imagine that to see a woman sort of like take charge and give orders to men would have been like a bit jarring for people to see at the time.
I think for some, surely, like there might have been some males in the audience thinking, yeah, right, you know, why is a woman, in this sort of leadership role? But I think there might have even been people too back at the time who were, you know, well, to use probably a 70s word, were digging it, you know,
Yeah,
and that might not be just people who were of a younger generation coming through, but also maybe there were some people of the older generation who were completely fine with, the female character being the one to survive and to become more of a leader. Um, so I think it's just a bit of both, and it can happen even today as well. Like you can have some people that would look at this and go, "Yeah, right," as if this would happen, and then you have other people that are like, "What do you mean? Of course, this is completely understandable that this could happen. That Ripley's character would take charge."
yeah. I mean, obviously in this day and age, I think we are a tad more accepting of it. But the only other major franchise I know of that went on to like sort of become a massive success with like a female action hero was the Hunger Games series, and I'm not gonna lie, there probably are like sort of like really bad double standards in Hollywood, but so I think it's kind of a bit depressing in one way that there's not that many sort of franchises where the hero is a woman, and yeah, I'm glad for Alien, sort of like blazing the trail for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the interesting thing too is even in John Carpenter's movies, he has women in those movies that are strong-minded, and that. So yeah, I think that there's quite a few movies that might not get that much recognition for having that kind of thing, but I know in The Fog, the character played by Adrienne Barbeau, who was actually married to Carpenter at the time they were filming that. She plays the the disc jockey, and she's not a character that is useless or anything like that. She's got quite a lot of confidence about her and that kind of thing. So,
Ooh.
I mean, there's also Lara Croft, and of course, a lot of people are like, yeah, but she's completely sexualized too much, and it's like, well, okay, yeah, in the early times, you had she was appearing on FHM, I think, and you know, um, that was back in the PS1 days and that kind of thing. So they're exploiting that, but if you look beyond that, there's a lot more to the character than just her outward appearance. And
Yeah, definitely.
you know, um, but Ripley's a different kind of character because she's not using any. Well, not that Lara is always using her sexuality either, but Ripley's not really using her sexuality as an advantage in anything or anything like that. Like she's not trying to seduce Ash to put him off guard so that she can, get him away from her or anything like that. In that scene that we see that um, he sort of, attacks her. So we don't see Ripley using her sexuality to try and lull him into a false sense of security or something.
It wouldn't work anyway because he's an android. But
Yeah,
I think it's mentioned in the commentary that the reason why he tries to suffocate her with a magazine is because there's this kind of like warped frustration that he's always like wanted to to be crude for a minute, he's always wanted to sort of like you know, shag her, but being an android, yeah, he's like unequipped to do that, and he's so like that's why he like picks up the magazine and rolls it up, because he wants to, he's unable to do it, so he like uses the magazine as sort of like like a phallic sort of like way to like like push himself on her, because this film is, for lack of a better term, it is about rape, and sort of like about male desire, rape in sort of like literal and figurative forms.
Well, yeah,
And even the end, yeah,
warped,
even,
warped
yeah,
desire.
definitely warped, yeah. And when you think about it like that, this film is sort of like pretty scary, in like the way how it goes about exploring rape. Even an alien rapes someone in this film, and later on we don't really quite see what the xenomorph does to Lambert and Parker. Yeah, Lambert and Parker. We don't see what it does to them.
No. And another thing I just thought of too is like the magazine against her mouth, like, paper cuts and things like that. It's like, there's also that concern, too, like is what injuries that will cause too.
Yeah, you could argue that the whole Ash is as an android comes out of left field, and when I first saw this film, I was like, what the,
Yeah.
what what was that about? But you could say it doesn't really go anywhere, but at the same time, it just might go, okay, he suddenly makes sense.
Well, yeah, and then I think on subsequent viewings, once you can look at the movie a bit more deeply then and pay more attention to him. So this is the thing, like, if you watch this movie for the first time, you might not have been paying as much attention to him as you would knowing that he's an android. Going back, you'd be like, what's he doing in this scene? Wonder what he's doing in this scene. And that kind of thing.
Yeah, sort of like adds quite a bit of mystery to him, and I love that model of Ian Holmes' head. It just it looks just like they're setting like Ian Holmes' head on fire.
Yeah. I think that would be a bit surreal. I know some actors have talked about how in movies, if they get their head decapitated and they've got the dummy version, and they're amazed at how real it looks and also disturbed by that. It makes me wonder how surreal it would be for an actor to see their a dummy version of their severed head just sitting somewhere.
Yeah.
Good old practical effects.
Which Scott still uses in quite huge abundance. He used quite a lot of practical effects on Prometheus, for one. In Gladiator, he built half the actual Gladiator stadium, and the rest was filled in by CGI. I mean, he maintains that CGI is good, but he only uses it when he has to.
Yeah, I think it's a good tool to use in the right way and for the right reasons. And it reminds me too of when they say, it's good to have the practical, because then you have the actor, if they're, doing something, that sort of helps the CG artists in being a bit truer to how the actor was performing or how the animatronics were performing.
And now, Lambert, she's just frantic to get off this thing. She's just, she just cannot take any more. And I suppose I'm not really sure how I would react into this situation, but I feel as though I'm looking at a genuinely frightened woman, like who is just like beyond the pale of, sort of like any all her courage is gone. Basically, she just wants to just get the hell off the ship, and I suppose if I was to like put myself in her shoes, I mean, I think I would probably feel the same. Because like, I just think it's a terrifying notion to even imagine just being like stuck on this ship with that bloody xenomorph that just feels like it's hidden in the shadows, just stalking the crew somewhere.
Yeah, and I guess some people might say, well, that's doing a stereotypical woman who is afraid and that. But I think because you've got Ripley as a counterpoint, you've got two female characters here, and they don't have a male equivalent of Lambert who is scared and that kind of thing. But we don't know if Harry Dean Stanton's character was still alive and Yaphet Kotto's was dead. How would Harry Dean Stanton's character do in the situation? Would he be, frightened or that kind of thing? So I guess with Lambert being frightened, and that it's not to me a sign of, all women are weak and that kind of thing. It's just that, this is a character who is a woman who just also happens to be afraid. And, even men who are in the audience who are afraid can identify with her being afraid.
Yeah. For me personally, in a weird way, this film feels more and more scarier the more times I watch it, because I always notice something different and talk to other people who have seen it, and listening to the commentary from the actors and Ridley Scott. I think it's like, because when I first saw it, I didn't find it as scary, but as I get older and sort of like become more aware of things like rape and obviously talk of interstellar space travel like becoming a possibility, and I find it quite frightening to think that this kind of thing. I'm not saying it's plausible, because I don't believe it would be plausible yet. But what I will say is, who knows? Who really knows? I mean, you just don't. I mean, what's really out there? Why? Maybe aliens are just waiting for us to come out and find them, so they can kill us.
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't know what other life forms are out there that could be like, hostile to us if we entered their domain. It's just like certain animals. There's certain animals that if you go into their domain, you're going to be attacked because you're on their property, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, like personally, I find it hard to be afraid of horror movies now. Like, I'd probably have to watch this movie on my own out in the middle of nowhere to maybe simulate some sort of fear about the movie. But I get what you're saying though, where it's like, as things like interstellar travel become more of a possibility or get closer to that, it's like, how scary would it be to be in that situation where you're in outer space and you can't just run out the door and escape. You're on this ship, and makes it a bit more claustrophobic and that kind of thing. Plus you've got an alien on board. Yeah, I'd be very scared too.
Exactly. And one thing people complain about in Prometheus is people say characters don't act like actual characters, and there's a couple of scenes where like characters do things that don't make any sense, and why don't they run away or whatever. And it's like, well, Lambert she could have ran off away from the xenomorph, but she was frozen stiff and scared to death. I think she was by the door. She could have easily ran out the door if she wanted to, but she didn't. So, bear that in mind the next time you watch Prometheus.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, for example, a scientist, even the most, civilized, I'm not wanting to use that word, with scientists, they wouldn't have a lack of curiosity and things like that, and it wouldn't be as if all their curiosity would be eliminated just because they're a scientist. I'm sure there'd be plenty of scientists who are quite level-headed in certain situations, but if you put them in another, they might be like, this looks so cool, or I'm so fascinated by this. So in that moment, they might forget precaution and just go ahead and go, oh, I'll touch this creature,
Yeah.
Then they get in
Yeah,
over
I
their
mean,
head.
like, what, you could say, why did he put his face right up to the egg? Was that not a bit stupid?
Well, yeah, I mean, wouldn't you want to be as far away as you can from it? And, if you were going to open it up or whatnot, use some long sort of instrument to do it, not stick your whole face right in there. But
Yeah.
they were curious, he wanted to know.
I'm certain we will be doing a commentary on Prometheus at one point.
Oh, definitely, I'd love to.
Yeah, because as I said earlier, I mean, like in a scene a few minutes ago, Lambert, she was just frozen stiff and she was frightened. That's why she didn't run. I think when people are scared, and they're in a situation that they just have no concept of, and seeing their friend die or something like that, they wouldn't be thinking straight. They wouldn't be thinking, oh, I need to, run. They'd be like, frozen to the spot like she was.
Yeah, I guess on some level, some people forget that they're sitting in the comfort of their own home watching this happen. So it's quite easy to sit there and say, well, I'd do this in this situation because we're able to observe it as an outside entity. But if you were in this situation, you might be frozen in fear. You might not try to run away,
And now we see what happened to Brett and Dallas, and we're watching the director's cut with a few scenes added back in, and what do you? I think I slightly prefer the theatrical version. I prefer to not know the fate of the crew members. I think it's scary, to think that we don't know what happens. But at the same time, I don't mind this scene because it's sort of like the scene, like the bit just now where Ripley she burns Dallas. It sort of does add quite a bit to her character. So I suppose you could say both this version and the director's cut. Sorry, I mean both this version and the theatrical version are good. Well, I suppose really the question you should ask is, do you want to know what happened to them?
Yeah, and I guess also too, it's like, do you want to watch the version that's going to take just a little bit longer, maybe to play, or do you want to just watch the version that means you can watch it and finish the movie earlier? I think that plays a part too. I know for myself though, with movies like Aliens and Terminator 2, I'm just so used to the extended and director's cuts of those movies now that if I see, and I saw Terminator 2 on television again a few months ago for the first time, and they played the original theatrical. And when something didn't happen that was in the extended, I was like, hang on, they're missing scenes. And then I thought, oh, of course, that's right, this is the original version. So I got so used to the extended that I didn't even think to think of whether or not they had the extended version on television or
not. First time I saw Terminator 2 was on TV, and they showed the extended cut. So that was the version I was always used to as well.
And I think that's really good that was your experience, because I definitely think that it's better the director's cut than the theatrical.
Yeah. In my opinion, though, perhaps the original version of Alien is a bit better, because I think it's, as I said, I think it's just maybe a bit scary and sort of maybe a tad more sort of frightening, where you don't know just what happened. I mean, I suppose finding out the fate of Dallas and Brett is fine, but I prefer to not know.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's sort of like a bit of indifference, really. If I only had the version that was theatrical, I'd be happy with it. But I think that without this scene, it gives more focus on Ripley being the last survivor, or being the only survivor, I should say. So it sort of makes you focus more on that. And this sort of like redirects the character or puts her on a bit of a detour for a few moments. But then again, that might...
And the thing
Yeah, sorry.
the thing I just thought as well, this alien could be a queen. It could grow to become a queen, which is why it cocooned Brett and Dallas. You know, it could at one point lay eggs and turn those two into hosts as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know.
Well, that's true. But I think the other thing that you could say about this scene is that it could add to the fact, hang on, she's got, she doesn't have much time to do this. So it could play into the fact of, oh shit, she only has a certain amount of time. Is she going to make it?
It's like a time limit in a video game, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like funny you mention that because obviously, like Resident Evil uses that. It's like you've only got a few minutes or to escape from the place before it blows up.
Like, I'm glad the alien didn't kill the cat, because I'm not really a fan of films where we see sort of animals die on screen, and as a cat person especially, if they had like the alien had killed it, that would have sort of like been a bit maybe too much for me to handle.
Yeah, see, I sort of prefer it when it's implied and not shown. Like in Terminator 2, when the T-1000 kills their dog, you don't literally see what he does to the dog through the process of doing it. You just see, the aftermath.
Yeah. I love the way how she just drops the box that the cat is in, and the cat's probably thinking, just where are we going? What are you doing? I'm totally going to gouge your eyeballs out when I get out of here.
Yeah, it's funny. I think it was either on an audio commentary or an interview, but I think there were people in the audience when this was being shown for the first time that were saying, "Just leave the damn cat. Don't worry about it." So it sort of goes to show it makes people, some people in that situation might be like that. Well, sorry, I'll sacrifice the cat because I'm more important. And that sort of gives a sense that the person is more self-centered. Whereas if someone is like, no, I'll take this cat with me, is more compassionate towards other things, and they're not just focused with their own survival. But I think Ripley's the kind of person that would want to have the cat survive. I don't think she'd be like, oh yeah, stuff it.
Ooh. Oh, I forgot how bright that explosion is. I had to shield my eyes for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, the film just kept building and building and building to this, and now, obviously, Ripley, she's self-destructed to the Nostromo. But I suppose you could say in one way, because I don't think a sequel was planned for this at the time, but you could say this is just like, it's like, it's not over for you yet, Ripley. It's just going to keep getting worse from here.
Yeah, and I guess if you look at all the first three movies, it's like a stage play with three acts. You've got Act 1, which is Alien, Act 2, which is Aliens, and then Act 3 is, the final act, and unfortunately, of course, it has a down ending. It's not a conclusion that is, she survived the entirety of her arc. It's like, unfortunately, at the end of it all, she dies.
Yeah, and again, spoilers for those who haven't seen this yet. We get this kind of final 10-15 minute scene. I think that's how long it goes on for, where where it's revealed the aliens stowed aboard the shuttle. And I think they weren't going to do this scene either. I think they were just going to, just like have Ripley escape from the ship and that would be it. And I think they also went back and forth on, should we have a scene, like, a final confrontation between her and the alien. But I'm glad it was added back in, because it's just like implies that this thing is a lot more sort of clever. It's got good intelligence, like it knew what Ripley was going to do, so it thought, I can outsmart you. I'm going to hide aboard your ship.
Yeah, it's thinking about strategies. It's not just a mindless thing that is just going to run around aimlessly. So I think that gives a lot of intelligence to the creature and makes it a bit more of a foe for Ripley as well, because obviously it is more powerful than her physically. And if it actually got a hold of her and attacked, it would kill her, quite quickly, just as it did with, obviously in this version you see that Dallas didn't die, but before he got burned. But in the theatrical, Dallas dies, gets attacked by the alien straight away. And so Ripley, she doesn't get attacked like that. So she survives, obviously, but the alien being intelligent is also a match for her too, because she's intelligent as well.
I believe this scene where we see her in her underwear was Sigourney Weaver's idea, I think it was.
Well, see, that's an interesting point, because I know that some people have said that, that's her being sexualized. And the question is, I think realistically she would have that underneath her clothing. So the character is taking off her jacket and that. So what would be there? To me, if it's not like it lingers, it doesn't do close-up shots of her butt and goes up and slowly, it doesn't make a big deal out of the fact that she's in her underwear.
No, and like I said, I think it was Weaver's idea. I mean, I'm not really sure about that, but if it was, I believe she was completely comfortable with doing it anyway, and so
Yeah, I mean, the equivalent, the male equivalent would be if they just were in underpants and a singlet.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that if it was a male and they did that, it's I don't know. I mean, you could argue that they could have gone that route. They could have just said, we need to have a scene where there's at least some kind of, provocativeness to it, so we'll put her in underwear. But to me, it doesn't come off like that in this film. It doesn't seem that was the intention behind it.
No, and I think Sigourney Weaver, she wanted to do a scene where in Aliens, she wanted to have sex with the alien. So, draw whatever conclusions you want from that.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, personally, I think that would have been a mistake to have that in the films.
I don't think it would have made much sense, personally.
Yeah, it's sort of like, really, why? What attraction would there be?
And they were originally going to end this film with the alien killing Ripley, but using her body to sort of speak through her into the flight recorder using her voice. But my knowledge on the Xenomorph's ability is limited, but to me, I'm not really sure how it would have done that. I mean, are the Xenomorphs able to do that kind of thing? I mean, I know that they're physically strong and they've got the acid blood and all the rest of it, but like controlling someone's dead body to use their voice, that just seems maybe a tiny bit sort of far-fetched to me, and I'm glad that they didn't do that.
Well, I mean, just think about it. If they had done that, there's no scenes prior to actually prove that it has that ability. Like, unless you want to leave that as a shock ending, but to to me that makes more sense that the Predator can do it because it's got the technology to record your voice and then, play your voice back and make it sound like you. Whereas to make the alien be able to do that through, a dead body just doesn't, it'd be one thing if they established early on that the alien can mimic voices. It's another thing to just put it in there and say, oh, by the way, the alien can talk through your dead body and sound exactly like you.
I like how the alien was just sleeping, and Ripley took advantage of that and is now going to, blow it out of the airlock, which is sort of like, like the alien thought it was going to get an easy ride, and probably didn't mean to give away its position. It was probably waiting for, to rest, and then have Ripley become vulnerable and then attack her. But obviously Ripley caught on to what it was going to do, and then thought, oh no, you think you can outsmart me, bitch? I'm going to fucking outsmart you.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is that Ripley is, she doesn't think that there's any threat anymore. So when she takes her jacket and that off, it's because she feels safe to do so. It's sort of like if you came back home from work from a very hectic day, there's no more threat of having anything that happened at work, come into your own home and sort of make your day even worse. You can relax when you get back home, you can unwind, you could walk around in just your underpants if you wanted. So to me, it's that kind of thing where she feels safe enough to do it, but she doesn't yet know that the alien is actually in there with her. Because if she did know, she wouldn't be like that. She would have kept, what she was wearing on. Because she would have thought, well,
exactly,
there's an alien in here.
Yeah, I love just how this final scene was filmed and acted and edited, and it's the thing's dead now, it's finally over, but obviously we know now, as you said earlier, retroactively, we know the story is just going to keep on going from here, and I'm glad they sort of didn't kill off Ripley, and I'm glad they sort of had this kind of more ambiguous ending, which did leave room, for the story to keep going.
Yeah.
And this recording, it was used, I think, at the end of Alien 3, which brought Ripley's character arc full circle.
Yeah, I think it was a great addition, actually, to Alien 3 to have that happen.
Signing off, and well, what can be said about this classic that hasn't already been said? I mean, I think it still holds up visually quite well. I mean, obviously, if you like effects like the stop motion effects and the explosion at the end have dated a bit, but aside from that, I think it looks as though it wasn't filmed that long ago.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely still holds up. I think in a lot of aspects, not only the visuals, but also the story, the characters, the music, things like that. The music itself isn't some, techno type of thing. Not to say that can't work. I think it works really well in Event Horizon, for example. But yeah, a lot of things in this movie still hold up today, and with every movie you could go through with a fine-tooth comb and be nitpicking at everything. Even the most, the greatest movies, if you went through them with a fine-tooth comb, you could pick a lot of stuff that doesn't fit or looks dated, but I think sometimes you just have to ignore that and think more about the experience of watching the film as you're watching it. Are you being drawn into the world? Are the characters interesting? Because movies are a trick. It's making us forget that we're actually watching a movie. And I know some people can get taken out of a film if they notice something, but, like in this movie, if you're someone who knows a lot about computers and that sort of thing, you might look at this stuff and say, there's no way that would work like that. But to someone who's a layman, they'd watch that and they wouldn't think of that. So they'd still remain in the movie. whereas someone else would be like, hang on, this is taking me out of the film now.
For me personally, everything in the film feels plausible to some extent. I mean, as I said, I mean, I don't really quite know just how close we are in terms of achieving this kind of space travel. But you know, with talk of manned missions to Mars and you know, technology and you know, the International Space Station and stuff like that, it does sort of like make me think, you know, what's really out there? You know, what's out there that we don't know about? And I think it's kind of, well, that's why one reason why I find this film like, you know, kind of more scary and sort of tense, like the more like technology moves along. And I'm not going to say that this would ever happen, but I think this film, like for me at the very least, just sort of like makes me think it's kind of plausible. It could happen. Emphasis on the word could. I'm not saying it will, but I think part of me thinks it could happen.
Yeah, and I agree too, you know, and I think, you know, sometimes people, when they hear someone say something like that, when you use the word could, you know, I know that you mean, you know, it's something that might happen or might not happen. You know, the possibility is there. But some people might go, well, you know, no, and think you're making a definitive statement, about it. But, you know, I think movies like this, you can bring some, new idea to it sometimes, apply certain things to it. Like, if I watched this as a kid, there'd be a lot of stuff that would have went over my head. But as an adult, I would have picked up a lot more stuff. And so I come to the movie, now, the age I am, which is about 31, and, I watched this movie and, you know, it still holds up for me. You know, I haven't brought anything else
Same
to the
here.
movie that makes it fail or anything like that in my eyes.
Same here, and the more I watch it, for me, like with Scott's other sort of films that may have gone over my head the first time, for me it gets better with repeated viewings, and it feels as though, in one way, it feels more relevant now than it ever did. With, like I said, with technology moving on, interstellar travel, and you know, us like preparing to explore more worlds. It's like, it's like, do we really want to go into space?
Yeah, sort of like, you know, it begs the question, you know, should we go to areas where there might be, danger lurking, or is it like on Earth when, you know, people were discovering, islands and that for the first time, and they were, you know, going ashore and they didn't know what to expect? You know, is some strange animal we've never seen before going to come out and attack us? Are there any natives that we don't know about that have come out and kill us? You know, except in space, it's a lot more of a different situation, because up in space, it's not like you can just immediately come back to Earth, unless you're in Star Trek and get, teleported down.
Yeah, you do. So yeah, that about wraps up this commentary. We hope you enjoyed listening to it, and hoped we hope we made you consider a few things that you may not have considered before, because not everyone is aware that this film is basically about rape. But we hope it didn't frighten you too much.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's definitely, a very, thematic element that is in here, and I just think that the alien, and what it can do, men and women are both at risk of this creature. It's not, choosing one over the other. So, yeah, so I hope there's a lot of stuff that we might have brought to your attention that you might not have known, and for those that already did know, well, hopefully there might have been something that triggered a memory of something that you might have forgotten, or made you want to explore an idea further or do some research. I know myself, sometimes I like to go online and research certain things about a movie that I've seen, and that. So, yeah, we'll see you on the next audio commentary.
Yeah, we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be doing more commentaries throughout October, and we hope you listen to those as well.
Thanks again.